Thank you very much. Yeah, today we're going to talk about some really interesting things concerning journalism, artificial intelligence. We could go into the world of fake news, but what we're really going to do today is kind of start wide, and then I really want to hear, Felice, 20 years, I'll have to say 20 years, right? The Media Line is celebrating 22. I'm 2 years late. 22 years, which is a lot of expertise and a lot of experience. So let's just dive right in. Explain to us about the lack of information and what that means in today's industry of journalism and news.
First of all, I want to thank you, and I want to thank your family for this amazing opportunity of coming together of so many amazing creative people, people of faith from all over the world. And I was just with you in Texas, and that was an incredible event. Bringing people to learn about truth is half the battle. So if we talk about that and just start with, are we getting truth, and how many of you trust truth? How many, by raise of hand, actually trust what you read and hear? Oh my. I don't even know if I see a hand. So I have to answer that, Jake. We are living in a dire time. We see the partisanship and polarization everywhere. And it reflects what we see when we're reading and we're seeing television, and we look at the media, and we're part of the media, and we wonder what went wrong. I was making notes thinking about what am I going to share today, and I had to come back to Thomas Jefferson. Our liberty depends on the freedom of the press, and that cannot be limited without being lost. We don't have democracy, folks, if we don't have a free, honest press. Not a press that tells you what you want to hear, not a press that takes a side, but a press that's going to give you complete narratives, like it or dislike it. That's the beginning of all of the essence of the problems we're encountering. We didn't even start on things like artificial intelligence, and I'm sure we're going to get there, Jake, but we must begin with, how do we read a news story? How do we look at this information?
Okay, and I want to dive into that a little bit more. So the lack of information, do you see that being a result of the user? Do you see that being a result of the industry? Or do you see that being a result of, let's say, government and larger powers? Where do you feel like the source of lack is coming from today?
I think that there are a lot of elements that drive what we're seeing. You have the issue of the bottom line, and you have to start with money. And you can't run anything. We're a nonprofit, so we also have to get funding through donors or foundations. But look at the newspapers today, they're driven by advertising. But the advertising shouldn't be driving the narrative. And what you're seeing today, too, is often that is not the case. I can't say that it's rampant and it's everywhere, but it definitely exists. Then enter social media, the same thing. So then young people are driven by news through sound bites. They don't even understand what news is anymore. And it's really those that are digging deep and they look for long-form information and are learning that they can research and find and understand how to do it are the ones that are going to be the leaders tomorrow and make that dent. So the answer is all of them. It's government because government needs to get involved. It's media outlets because they need to be concerned with not just the bottom line. It's the intelligent public that needs to be educated to what is news, what do you look for, what are the problems in the industry.
Good, and so kind of writing into this space of, let's say, the younger side of the market, right, the more advanced, let's say the technological side, artificial intelligence. Let's dive into that a little bit. I'd love to hear your perspective. I'm very curious to hear what you think about AI in the journalistic area. In my agency, we do a lot of social media, a lot of content creation. And so we're also very aware of what's happening with ChatGPT, for example, and a lot of content creation AI services. Where do you see in the industry this kind of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, right? The SWOT analysis. Where do you see today AI in this process that we're in?
Artificial intelligence has been around for a long time. There are elements of artificial intelligence that I think are phenomenal. If I was a police officer and I had to really sift through tons of information, artificial intelligence is phenomenal. If I was developing health records and I have to juggle and find data quickly so I can develop the next new pharmaceutical compound, same thing. But in the realm of news, in the realm of universities, we're in a lot of trouble, folks. In identifying what's happening there, we won't use it in our newsroom. There are newsrooms that tried it, and guess who lost? It was the newsroom. It's not developed enough. You have bad actors that exist, and imagine what's going to happen when we have the American elections, or any elections for that matter, and already reports are coming out to how artificial intelligence can be used. Whether it's voice activation, whether it's Jake, hey, you're going to be interviewing people on ChatGPT, through ChatGPT, and creating your own show, and it's not you. It's the animated version of you who might not be asking the questions you would have asked. That's a problem.
And that's very interesting, and honestly, it excites me. I love that whole side of the AI world, but when we're focusing on journalism, it is frightening. It really is. I mean, as I understand, you can pull in partial information into an AI system, service, whatever. Pull in partial information or partial happening or a source, and then create a new piece of information that is partially true. It lacks depth, it lacks, right? Is that kind of where things are today?
Well, the problem is that it's still young, and it works on the fact of individuals that are feeding it data. It's data fed, and it's how you feed that data. And if someone is feeding that data and they have a bias, then how do you think that's going to present itself within the algorithms of information that you're obtaining? Even Sam Altman, who created ChatGPT, just testified in Congress, and he said we need regulation in the form of licenses. The EU just came out, and they're looking for some kind of act that they can create against artificial intelligence as the checks and balances. It hasn't gone through. I have always opined that why go out in the market with this to this extent when it's not ready? And there's so much danger. Just look at what ChatGPT has done in the sphere of anti-Semitism. 2022, do you realize the tweet is an example of Kanye West came out? And then again, it was pushed out and pushed out and pushed out, right? It was about calling for DEFCON 3 on Jews. It was tweeted to 30 million people. Now, even if it was walked back, the damage was already done. And that's half the battle as well. So if you look at a newspaper and you say that's wrong and you get a retraction, how large is that retraction? Jake, we got a bigger problem here. It's the problem again of educate the public. I mean, how many people here went to journalism school or communication school? Okay, so the handful that did understand the mechanisms of what a news story is about, the who, what, when, where, and why. You need sources. You don't just write a story because we just had a press conference and tomorrow the headline is the Jerusalem prayer breakfast just came together and there was nothing there. And unless you get to interview, which we've been doing all day, and you speak to people and you get to the essence and the heart of what's happening, you don't know anything. So don't look at news outlets that don't have sources.
Okay, so we've kind of painted a grim picture of, let's say, the mass media, and we've talked about monopolies of information, it sounds like. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about pure journalism. Is there such a thing as pure journalism? Maybe it has a different industry name. But is there pure journalism, and what does it look like in comparison to this monopolized kind of system that we just explained? What is the contrast here?
Complete journalism. Everybody has a bias. I don't like to use the word unbiased because we all hold bias. We need to see complete journalism that you can trust. It looks like a picture that gives you the narratives of different people's voices. It looks like who is that person who's telling you that story. Check out who that writer is, that author. Most people don't bother to do so. When I actually test people 9 times out of 10 to read a news story and tell me if they know who the author is, most of the time they don't. We as a news agency feed content. Our partners and our clients are the Jerusalem Post and Christian media outlets and SRN News to 3,000 radio stations and many others. And I asked people, did you see the Media Lines news story, just to test? They don't even realize it's a Media Line news story half the time, because we haven't been engaged to learn how to read news, how to write news, what to look for, how to trust news. But the good news, actually, Jake, is that there are mechanisms out there in the industry that are trying to change it.
And let's talk about that. So let's say you're on the user side, right? The rest of us. Let's say you're not in the industry, okay? And you're at home and you're starting your morning off, you're having your cup of coffee, you open your phone, your iPad, your laptop, whatever, and you want to see what happened overnight. Let's say you're in the West, you want to know what happened in the East or vice versa. How do you evaluate, or how do you start the process as a user to gain complete information from a source that's reliable?
The first thing I tell people is to read something they don't agree with. That's a hard thing to do, because it's easy to open up something you like and think it's fine. But if I read something I totally disagree with, it's going to balance out me thinking, maybe I need to delve further. Take a look then, are there other news sites writing articles on the same topic? It's extremely helpful. So even in our newsroom, when we're looking at stories, and by the way, we have a teaching program with 17 universities signed for credit. Students are actually coming this week, it's very exciting, from leading universities to train in journalism. The bottom line is, in order to be able to adapt and alter how we think, I started to talk to you about education. We have to educate our kids to learn how to do it. My father used to have me read the New York Times from a young age. I hated it at that age. I really, really praise him till this day, because I understand how valuable it is to feel that ink in your hands. Most young people don't even know from that today, and understand how I see the photos and how did you get there. And I remember interviewing the bureau chief of the New York Times one time here in Israel and said, what do you do when you write a story and people are complaining that it's not right? And I'm sure many of you have said there are stories in many outlets, including the New York Times, that write stories that are not correct. And what did Steve Erlanger say? I did everything I could to write the perfect, complete story. I wake up the next day, the headlines changed, the photo's different than what represents what I thought it said, and you don't necessarily know how the editor might edit the story. So equally important is having really good journalists, really good editors, really good film editors, because everybody has to come into play in a newsroom. It's not about one person, it's about the entire entity.
Let me ask about the journalists themselves. So would you recommend tracking with specific individuals? Let's say if there's specific journalists that we feel as a reader that he or she provides complete stories, complete journalism, would you recommend that that's a good way, again, when we wake up in the morning, we grab our coffee, we go and we track with an individual, that we've kind of vetted that person wherever he or she has an outlet, to track with an individual? Or do you recommend more of a source in terms of the Media Line, for example, or vetting an outlet itself and tracking with them? How would you recommend?
I actually think that the outlets need boosts. Outlets won't exist if we don't get the boosts we need. I think it's important that the writers and the journalists and everyone as a whole come together and recognize when they go to the outlet. And everybody's into influencers. But influencers are nice, but again, if we don't have strategic information that government officials, business people are using to make decisions, then we are going to end up in a very grave state of place. You know, I think about the Bible. And when you think about the Bible, I think of it as God being the biggest publisher we ever had, right? Think of Moses. What was he tasked with? He had to send the investigators into Canaan to see what happens with the Jewish homeland. Did the investigators all come back and say that everything was good? Did they tell the same story? Not at all. So really, fake news started a long time ago. I don't think there's anything new under the sun. It's really how we understand what's in front of our eyes. How do we analyze, Jake, what's in front of our eyes? I really honestly believe it's important to like the agencies that are doing it right, to maybe hone in on stories that are good. Therefore, it's giving people an opportunity, and then the journalists themselves get the credit too, and that's a good path forward. But just as important as our artificial intelligence right now is being looked at, and with a microscope, mind you, because we're really in trouble. The fact that it was released so fast, the fact that so many people, and again I bring up bad actors, can get their hands on the capability of mass producing information for campaigns, for news sites themselves. So then you too don't know what is real and what is not. That's where we have to be able to be educated ourselves and understand what's happening. Would you buy a car and not look into what you're buying? And that's amazing to me, that we would not go to a doctor if we didn't check them out. We would not buy a car. We certainly wouldn't buy a house. And guess what? Where do you normally go to get that information? To the news industry. And everybody forgets how valuable the news industry is.
Wonderful. So we just have about 5 minutes left. So one of the last questions that we can dive into is the industry itself. So there weren't many hands that went up here when you asked about who has a background in communications, but I know there are people online as well that are watching that certainly could have that background themselves, right? And so I would love to hear a little bit from the Media Line perspective as well. I mean, if you have a group of college students coming regularly, I assume, and I'm positive they either or both bring with them new ideas and technologies and tools that they're aware of, and at the same time experience those with the Media Line. So can you tell us a little bit about the tools and the systems and different things today that are being developed or exist in the journalism industry?
The journalism industry, even in universities, is testing all kinds of things with artificial intelligence right now. I've witnessed it myself in some of the schools, and they are just learning too, am I going to use this for the future? They themselves are working through this technology and in developing both from the positive and looking at the positive and negative of what can be done here. The other thing is looking at, and this happens in universities as well as in the larger market, they're looking for ways to look at where fake news is and analyzing and deep analyzing of how things are fed to determine fake news on social media. This is where the young people are very helpful when they come in, because they've had a lot of experience in social media in the universities, as an example.
So it sounds like almost in the cyber security industry, there's hackers, there's cybersecurity. There's hackers, there's cybersecurity, and both are constantly trying to outrun one another. I mean, is there a parallel here in the information industry of how would you create this?
Hire rehabilitated hackers, seriously, because you have to think like that to change it. And it sounds terrible, but it's the reality. Most people don't think like that. We are, that's why I wasn't being flippant. We're really in a situation where you need smart people. Think like computers. Understand how is the devious actor going to use this, get out millions of people who are going to vote for a certain candidate because they released to the market information that was created through algorithms, through chat GPTs, through voice, all kinds of promotional ways of handling these things, and then what? So this is where we are. This is real, and we really better get in the game, or we are going to be left behind, everybody.
And how can we get in the game? What can we do?
So I think it's important to look at, there are universities like Syracuse University that are doing studies today in teaching public what to look for. I mean, we also have a video up on our site that we spent months in creating and teaching the who, what, when, where, and why of news. What is a news story? What is an analysis? What is an opinion? Opinion is not news. It should be labeled differently. And ground news is an example. very interesting, a woman from NASA, along with a very impressive high-tech techie, created also a way of dissecting every news agency they can get their hands on, and they look at it in a way through data and story by story, if you are right, center, left, and where you are on facts. So how do you think the media line did?
I was just going to ask, what were the results?
We came in center and high on facts, and there you go. And I challenge everybody to go look at it. Don't ever trust me. I always challenge you to go look for yourselves.
Good, so we just have a little bit more time here, so I do want to ask about the others on that ranking. Not that you need to name names, but I mean, that Syracuse did. Was there a feel that you had on that? I mean, was there some surprises in the results? I mean, the media line was center and high, and that's great. Did you notice?
Barely. I think, you know, if you looked at the way CNN would describe itself, and actually they're moving the bar, they're also trying to engage many more Republicans now because they see the market is not listening. You see a huge sea change going on right now. But you also see a flip side in terms of social media. I've always said things are cyclical. By the way, I'm not on Facebook. And there are many reasons. It doesn't mean I may not be on it sometime later this year. That's a different story for a different reason, and happy to discuss privately. But honestly, look at Meta. Meta is Facebook, right? They bought it out, changed the name, all kinds of reasons. They had to lay off a lot of people. What happened? They got rid of their fact-checking project that took 1.5 years to put together. So there you go.
And in terms of consequences, I mean, Fox just had a settlement, right, with Dominion for $850 million, roughly, and that was more slander and libel, correct? But
right.
Do you foresee or forecast, or could you see a day when there are court cases happening around these sorts of topics, meaning looking back saying, big news channel, you were using AI in an improper way, you misled the population? Could you see something like that happening?
I could. Because but it has to get so bad to get there. And it's always when something gets to a point that's so horrific after the fact. And I'm trying to say to everyone, and I go on the Hill, by the way, and I've spoken to legislators about this, and spoken to professors and teachers of young people about journalism. Journalism is near and dear to me, as journalism was created, as the Walter Cronkites that many of the young people don't even know who he is. So the answer is yes.
Well, thank you very much. I encourage everybody to go to themedialine.org,
yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Where you can also sign up for email updates, I assume?
Absolutely, a daily news brief, and also just to follow not just the news and the videos, but also follow and track what our students are doing, and it's very exciting. 60 students that went through this program.
60?
60, that's
wow.
right. And wow. They are sitting in CBS and sitting in Bloomberg and sitting in Arizona Republic. They are all over. They are ambassadors. We are creating the future journalists.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.